What's going on, everybody? You know I love Q&A day, and I love seeing the questions that keep coming in, and I love the 5 questions that we've got this week. Now, remember, if you ever have a question in the comments below, simply type out your question. I look forward to hearing what you guys want to hear about and hear my opinion on. So don't forget, write your questions in the comments below. First, when I got home from the National, I had a few gift packs from some viewers, and I wanted to share those with you. First, my guy Mark sent me this cool Jordan card. Very awesome. Thank you, Mark. Trevor sent me some great stuff. How about this great Nettles? And then some Clemens stuff from Trevor. Love these. And then Warren Spahn. Warren Spahn card. That's very cool. Jeff sent me some cool stuff. Jeff sent me the Darryl Johnson Yankee card from the 1958 set and this cool Terry Bradshaw that Mookie is going to be very jealous of, because if you look right there, you can see right above the R is a pinhole. And then he sent me something very neat. He sent me a tag pack that was still sealed. I didn't know what was in it. I'd never opened one of these. He's a big tag guy. And it was a 1989 Topps Clemens Tiffany. You can tell it's the Tiffany here and because of the shine. With a tag grade of 9. So that is awesome. So thank you so much for that, Jeff. And then Adam sent me some cool stuff. He sent me in his own slab this cool Clemens card with some info on it. Look at this. He sent me a Greg Nettles rookie, but look at how sharp it is. It's a beautiful card. Absolutely beautiful. And to those of you that know about this card, this is actually the error, that little loop right over the edge there is a loop error. It comes with and without. The error is the one with the loop. It's not supposed to do that. It's supposed to take the turn right there. So that is amazing. Thank you for that. And then a couple more Clemens cards, which will go into the PC. Anytime I can add, I'm not sure if I have this one. I'm not sure if I have that card. I might not. And anytime I can add Clemens cards to the PC, that is awesome. So thank you so much for those. I'm excited to give my opinion. It's really Q&O. It's really question and opinion. There's not a right or a wrong answer, although sometimes people tell me I'm wrong, which is cool. Let's take a look at our questions here. I just thought of a question for you, Greg. Like most vintage collectors, I have cards I want from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Staying with the main Leaf, Bowman, and Top sets. How do you decide which to buy first, assuming you find cards at the same price? Is it just that 48 Leaf cards are harder to find than 60s Topps cards? I collect football, so I have to throw in Fleer in Philadelphia. I'm trying to concentrate on the 60s, but I love 50 and 51 Bowman. This is a tough question, but I'm going to tell you my philosophy and how I handle this. Now, the older the cards and the rarer the cards, the less likely they come up for sale. Now, if I'm searching for a card, like when I was searching for my 1949 Leaf Warren Spahn, I knew what I wanted one to look like. I wanted a centered one with good registration, which is very rare from that set. The registration in that set is commonly awful, and the centering is commonly awful. So when there's one in a grade that works for you, and it's centered, and it has good registration, and it has the eye appeal that you want, you kind of have to go for it. So for me, what I have done is all the cards that are more common, that are on my list of cards I want, are kind of on the back burner. And I try to have some of my funds available for the cards that don't come up as often, because then when they do come up, then you've got to pounce on them. So I'll give you an example. A card that I really want is a 1957 Topps Don Drysdale. I also want a 1961 Topps Juan Marichal. I want a 1960 Topps Willie McCovey. Those are 3 cards that I want to add to my collection. But they come up all the time. So because they show up all the time, I'm not in a hurry to grab them. I'll wait until there's one that's really, really undergraded at a really, really good deal. Because it's not like I'm going to miss an opportunity to get that card. So the cards that are older and the cards that are rarer from the issues that are rarer, when those show up and meet the eye appeal and the things that I need it to look like, when those pop up, I go for them. So, at my end of the year last year, my buddy Darren and I from Return to Collecting, we sat down and we made out a list of a bunch of different cards that we wanted. We had a target of about 15 cards, 5 from our top tier, 5 from our second tier, and 5 from our third tier. And some of the cards that are on that list are the ones that I just mentioned, the Drysdale and the Marichal. And I didn't buy them yet. Now, I absolutely could have found one at the National. There were lots of those cards at the National. But my focus at the National was a card that I don't see every day online, and that is very condition sensitive, and that is very rare to find in the condition that I want with the grade that I want. See, finding a 2 of a T206 card that looks like a 4 is like finding a needle in a haystack. So when I'm around a huge bale of hay at the National, I'm going to get out my magnifying glass and I'm going to be digging around trying to find it. Because I know that finding a Juan Marichal in a 6 or a 5 that has good centering and good eye appeal, that's much easier to do. So what I do is I do have cards on my list that I'm sure I could pick up today on eBay, or I definitely could have picked up at the National. But when I have the opportunity to get the cards that don't arise very often, like those Cracker Jack cards that I picked up that I showed in my video yesterday, when there's a good eye appeal Cracker Jack at a good price of a Hall of Fame player or an important player to the game and the hobby and the history of the game, I'm gonna take my resources, my money, and I'm gonna get those while I can, because those don't happen very often. So how do I prioritize? I prioritize based on how easy is it to find something that meets my needs for that particular card. If it's rare, that is a card that I focus on whenever they come up. If it's common, I kind of put it off and know I'll get to it at some point. Hey Greg, I'm an old guy but don't know much about business negotiations. At the National, if I see a card I want to use cards and cash to purchase, and the card is priced at $1,000, how would you do this to try to get a decent outcome? My cards are worth about $400. Thanks for looking at my dilemma. I think this is a terrific question, and I feel badly that I'm not getting to it until after the National, because it's not going to help you for the show we had last weekend. But what it is going to do is maybe give you some things to think about. Now, of all the 5 questions that I'm going to cover this week, this is the one that I kind of am the most excited to share my opinions on. See, I teach high school kids and I teach business finance, which for them, it's basically personal finance. And one of the units that we have, we talk about buying a car. We talk about buying new cars, the pros and cons, and buying used cars, the pros and cons. We talk about trade-ins. We talk about retail price versus invoice price. We talk about all of that. And I think that's the analogy to use here. One of the things I tell my students is when you're buying a new car, don't tell them that you're buying with cash. Don't tell them if you have a trade-in. The first thing I recommend is finding the right car. Once you find the car, then work on the price for that car. Once you've found the price for that car that you're good with, then you look into whether or not you have a trade-in. Now, I know a lot of people have opinions about trade-ins. There are pros and cons about trade-ins. But what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't sit down with a dealer and right off the bat say, I have a trade-in. I have said, whenever I've bought a car, the first thing is they said, you have a trade-in? I go, well, first thing I want to do is I just want to focus on this car. And if I can get a good deal on this car, then we can talk about whether or not I'm going to sell my car private party or do a trade-in. So let's just work on the price for this first. So my advice to you, if you have this situation again, and again, I'm sorry that I didn't get to this earlier, is I would first say that $1,000 card that you're looking at, try to get the best price you can on it. Once you find a valuation and a price point that works for you, maybe you can get it down to $900. Now, how do you get it from $1,000 to $900? Well, one of the things I always do is I always say, do you have any room? Do you have your best price? What's your best price? But I also say, you know, when they say this is my best price, I have to kind of respect it. So the dialogue goes something like this. It's a $1,000 card. I'm hoping to get it for less. The first thing I'll say is, are you pretty firm on your price? Then it gives them the opportunity to say, yeah, it's firm. That's the best I can do. Or they say, well, I have a little bit of room. If they say I have a little bit of room, then I say, okay, what's your best price? And they say $950. So now you've got it from $1,000 down to $950, and you haven't even made an offer. They are now negotiating against themselves. And then what I always will follow it up with is $950. Now, is that your best? That's your best. That's your absolute best. And then sometimes they'll say, well, I might have a little bit more room. Okay. Or sometimes I go, yeah, that's it. If they say that's it, I respect it because I asked for the best price. They gave their price and they said, yeah, that's the lowest. So I'm not going to then come in underneath them. So, hey, do you have any room? Yes, I could do $950. Is that your absolute best? Okay, I can. $920 would be my absolute bottom. At that point, I then, if the price works for me, then I would bring in the potential trade. I would say, okay, well, I have a few cards. I'm not sure if you'd be interested in them. $920 is where we're at with the card. So let's take a look at these cards. Do you have interest in these cards? Then you start working on the price for those cards to apply towards the $920. Don't go in and say, hey, I'm looking for a trade and cash deal. I would first set the price on the card that you want. Then I would work on the value of the trade-in, the cards that you are looking to liquidate and put towards the purchase. Just like I wouldn't go to a dealer and say, hey, I have a trade-in and I want this car. I want to do those two things separate. First, what is the price for the car? Get it to where I'm comfortable. Then I go, well, if I were to sell you this particular car or card, what is the price for that? And then we negotiate the value of that card. I do those things separate. Otherwise, sometimes some of the value in there gets kind of blended together. Again, this is just my philosophy and my take. Now, when I'm at a car dealership, I also don't tell them whether I'm doing cash. I don't say because I usually, when I buy a car, I just pay cash because I don't like interest. I don't like debt. But if I was going to borrow money or I wasn't going to go borrow money, I don't tell them that because sometimes what they'll do at a dealership, is they'll say, well, the car will sell for $18,000. Well, they might sell it to me for $18,000 thinking I'm going to get a loan through their financing and they'll make money off me on the financing. So if I say $18,000 and then there's, I'm going to do a cash deal, they may not do $18,000 if it's a cash deal because they want to make money off me from the financing. So I always try to keep the things separate. That's just my philosophy. So what I would do is first find the card, get the price and the value of the card negotiated. Then don't buy it yet. Then present the trade-in. Then present the cards that you have and make sure you have a value on those that's comfortable. And once you have the value on those that's comfortable, then apply the value of those cards to the purchase. And from the purchase, deduct that from the amount that you're going to pay in cash. Keeping those things separate, I think, is important, because otherwise sometimes it's really easy to lose a little bit of the value in the margins between the different pieces of the puzzle to make the deal work. That's my take. I'd love to hear in the comments what you did and how it turned out. A two-part question for you. Number one, do your students know about your love for the hobby? And how much, if any, have you shared with them? Two, are they aware of your prominent YouTube video presence? And if so, what do they think and say about it? Okay, I've had some similar questions along these lines before, and I've kind of briefly talked about it, but in different pieces. But I'll address the whole thing here. So first, I don't personally tell my students, "Hey, I have a YouTube channel." My focus with them is for them to feel like I'm an expert at what I'm teaching, and what I'm teaching my students is personal finance. So I try to prove to them by doing things like showing them my credit score, telling them that my house is paid off and I'm only 45, telling them that I don't have all these different debts. I don't have any credit card debt, that I fully fund my retirement accounts, my Roth IRA and my 401k, and I try to encourage them that way. And so I want them to think that my focus and my expertise is not on a YouTube channel, but on what it is I'm teaching them, because what it does is it creates credibility for me with them that I know what I'm talking about. Now, there are some people at the school that know I have a YouTube channel, and usually what ends up happening is they find out through one of those other people. Like, I have a teacher friend who pops into my room sometimes, and I use that as an opportunity to teach about my curriculum through a conversation with another adult. And what he tends to do is he tends to say, "Hey, have you told them that you have a YouTube channel?" And that's his way of kind of teasing me about it. Now, why don't I tell them? Quite frankly, for most high school kids, most high school kids don't really care about my hobbies and free time, which is fine. You know, I get it. They're curious about their own thing. Some students, when they find out, they are curious about it. And, you know, I will talk to some of them privately, but it's just not something that I really advertise to them. I do, when sometimes if a class finds out and they kind of ask me questions about it, I don't hide it. It's just not something that I come out front and center and say, "Hey, just, you know, I'm your teacher. My name is Mr. Miller. I have a YouTube channel about vintage baseball cards." That's just not really the way I do it. I share a lot about my family, just like I do here. I talk about my daughters. I talk about my wife. I talk about, you know, how we've financed things with them, you know, how we've gotten them cars, how we're paying for college, how we're doing all that kind of stuff. But it's not really something that I have gotten into. Now, I have taught an entrepreneurship class, but I taught that entrepreneurship class before, which is an elective at our school. I taught that before I started my channel. If I were to teach entrepreneurship again, I would absolutely talk about the channel, because it's very relevant to the channel, and it would build credibility for them that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to branding, when it comes to analytic evaluation, when it comes to, you know, working on growth of a company or of a brand. But because I'm not teaching that class right now, and it was a few years ago that I did, it's not something that I think has a lot of crossover with the things that I'm currently teaching. Hi, Greg. Here's my question. I'm 47, single, no kids, with a fairly decent baseball card collection, mostly vintage pre-war, that I've been collecting since being a kid. My sister passed a few years ago and never had kids herself. I would have loved to have passed my collection on to either my kids or hers, but it's looking like that possibility is becoming less of a reality as the years keep passing.
At this point, I feel like in a few years, when I'm retired maybe, going to card shows and setting up as a dealer to sell them might be an option. I feel like that would be keeping me busy, and my cards would be going into other collections, which would hopefully value them as much as I do. Is this something you have thought of? Or do you have any other alternative future plans for your own collection? Thanks, my friend, Jimmy.
Oh man, this is a great question. This is a fantastic question. I think all of us at some point we think about anything that we have of value, whether it be a house, an account, assets, what's going to happen to it once we're gone? Because we don't know when that's going to happen, right? Any of us today could have a tragedy. And if we have a tragedy, what happens to our assets? And for a lot of us that have spent a lot of money on our cards, our assets include our cards. So totally understand why this would be something to think about. Now, that's one of the reasons that I think grading cards, that's one of the biggest benefits of grading cards. It makes it very easy on whoever ends up with the cards to find out their value, what it is, and liquidating it makes it so much easier for them. So that is an argument for grading. Now, that doesn't mean you should necessarily grade, but if you don't have your cards graded, you kind of should have a plan in place probably that allows whoever is the person receiving your collection to make sure that they're not taken advantage of. But to your question, I am a strong believer that we have to keep our minds active. Right now, I'm 45. I keep my mind active in a lot of different ways, whether it be from my work, whether it be from dealing with finances, whether it be from, working on friendships or this channel, or my hobby. And so what I think a lot of people do is I think a lot of people struggle when they retire because number one, they had all this time and you kind of need to replace that time. You can't just stop going to work for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, 5 days a week and not replace it with something. That's not how we're designed. You can't be in a habit of doing something with your time all day, every day, for year after year after year, and then have nothing to fill the void. So, in addition to that, I think that based on your situation, not really having a person, it sounds like, to leave the collection to that will value the collection or know what the collection is, it makes you go, well, what should I do with it? And if liquidating it is an option, I think it's a great way to do two things at once. It's two birds with one stone. It could be just as fun to slowly work on liquidating your collection as it was to build your collection. I know a lot of people, my dad included, who have at times sold off portions of their collections. And that was a process that was an enjoyable process because you're kind of reaping some of the rewards of your good decisions with your collecting habits. You're like, man, I bought this card for $200 and right now I'm selling it for $600. That is a good feeling. So my advice would be, I think it's a great post-retirement hobby to slowly stay in the hobby by slowly exiting the hobby. Or maybe you want to slowly get more into the hobby. But one of the reasons we need hobbies is to have enjoyment in life. We can't just work. We can't just think about bills. We can't just worry about world problems. We need to have things that bring us joy. And that's what hobbies are for. Whether it be golf or gardening or baseball cards or playing cards with friends or pickleball or whatever it is. That's what we need. We need to have hobbies. So I think getting more into the hobby when you retire and maybe slowly exiting the hobby and having a fun time doing that through going to shows, as setting up as a dealer, and going through that process and seeing in the eyes of the person that will be taking the cards from your collection and now treasuring them instead of just putting it in a bubble mailer and mailing it across the country. I could see how that would be really enjoyable and a great way to keep your mind active, which is key. Because if we don't keep our minds active, then our minds go to mush, and that's not a good thing. So using your mind in the hobby and a way to maximize some of the financial benefits of the decisions in the collection that you've made over time, I think is a fantastic way to spend part of your retirement.
I have a question for a future show. With the amount of cards being produced right now, it almost feels like a junk era 2.0 is on the way. However, there are still some great iconic cards during the same time. In the future, do you think these will be considered vintage 2.0? And will the commons be like commons of the 80s and 90s? Or more like commons of the 60s and 70s?
If anybody doesn't think that we're in a junk wax era 2.0, you don't need to look too much further than watching a break on a video of a break. There will be a pack. The people will open a pack of Prism cards, an expensive pack of Prism. And there will be 20 cards or 15 cards in the pack. They will literally skip over the first 10 and just put them directly into the garbage can. Literally. And then they'll look for the 2 or 3 cards in the middle that are the ones that have the value. And when you do a break, which I've never done, and you do a break and you get certain cards, they don't even send you the base cards. They don't even send them to you. It's not even worth putting into sleeves and mailing to you. So if that's not junk wax, I don't know what is junk wax. If you bought something and it's not even worth packaging and mailing to you, it's junk wax. Very few base cards. Now, are some base cards have some value? Very few, but some do. Now, that's not my thing. I'm not, a modern collector, so I'm kind of just telling you what I observe. So I'm probably not the right guy to answer it. But most of the value in one of these packs or hanger boxes or blasters or whatever, it's generally just a couple of cards in the pack or in the package. That is where 98%, 99%, some might even say 100% of the value lays in that 1 or 2 cards. So yeah, I think it's very fair to say we're in a junk wax era 2.0. Now, how would I compare it? Would I compare it to the 70s? No, because some of the 70s cards, and especially some of the 60s, the high number commons in some of the 60s sets have a pretty good amount of value. So I don't think it's I wouldn't compare the current base cards to the base cards of the 60s and 70s, not even close. Will they ever be like that? I mean, the only reason they might have value is because everyone just throws them away. So the person who doesn't throw them away will be one of the only people who have them, I guess. But people don't build sets anymore. So if they don't build sets, what are the commons going to be good for? Will they ever have value? I don't think so. But if they do, it's just because everyone else threw them away because they have no value right now. Does that mean I would go around picking up piles of common base cards to hold for 20 years from now? I sure wouldn't. But, more power to you if you do. I would say it's more like the, 91 Donruss or 91 Fleer or, 90 Tops types cards. There's very, very minimal value, But of the biggest stars, there's a small amount of value. Yeah, that's kind of my thought. So that brings us to the end. If you have a question, guys, don't hesitate to ask. I genuinely love hearing your questions. Now, it was mentioned a few weeks ago, Greg, you should just keep all the questions and keep adding to them each week. I've been doing that. I have one question that is a carryover. So I need at least 4 questions this week. I just went to the National. I just had this amazing trip, this amazing experience. It seems like there would be some things that would be interesting to pick my brain on for that. So if you haven't, please submit a question down below in the comments, and I look forward to sharing my opinions of them next week.